Today I want to tell you the top 10 things that new designers or new graduates don't have when entering the workforce or applying to my company.
I'm Michelle Dirksey, an interior designer based here in Seattle, Washington, and in this series I'm going to walk you through everything you need to know about interior design.
The first thing is portfolio. Of course, when people are applying, they have a portfolio, but what they're often missing is a portfolio that represents their style, what they're good at, what they want to do, as well as an example of something that the firm they're applying to does. So I'll see projects that they were assigned in school or projects that they did at the one firm that they worked at. But really what I want to see more of is like, what do you like? What excites you? You can see my other video for more on that, but I would love to see what you bring to the table and what you want more of. The second thing that new graduates and or new employees don't often have a clear grasp of is the actual design process. So they maybe have learned a little bit about the steps, but they haven't seen a project through start to finish. So they don't know the sequence of events for a remodel or a furniture and decor project. And so even if you haven't done it many times, if you could just, research that and, write yourself a list of, the steps so that you know what's coming rather than waiting for your boss or your supervisor to tell you what's next. Also, knowing the process will help you to do a better job. If you know that you're doing step one and step two is just around the corner, and you can work in some of step two while you're on step one, that'll keep you ahead of the game. The third thing that I see more and more is that new graduates or new designers don't really have a set system for note-taking. And I partially blame this on PowerPoint. And in school, I feel like nowadays, instructors do a PowerPoint for every lecture, and you just see what's important. They've already bullet pointed it for you. You can just kind of sit back and know that those are the key takeaways. And the challenge for me then is when people enter the workforce, they don't know how to listen for what matters. And so I challenge you, either when you're working for your first employer or when you're in school, to not rely on the PowerPoint and to try to create the outline just by listening so that when you do enter the workforce, you can listen for meaning and not just write everything down. So an example that I'll see is that, people will take notes, but they won't know what to take notes for. Like they won't know what matters from the meeting, either when they're meeting with me or when they're meeting with, the clients. And, as an example with the clients, during the meeting, they're going to say a ton of things. And what we really care about is the action items and the approvals. So during the meeting, if you don't have a clear list of what did they approve, what did they hate, and what are our next steps, that it's not helpful. We don't just want a memorial of every single thing they said. We want to know what to do next. In order to know what to do next, I need a list of what they approved and what our next steps are. The next one is to listen for meaning instead of just listening for a task or an assignment. So obviously everyone can listen for what they're told by the client or their boss. If they're told to do something, they can go and do that. But if you don't understand the meaning and the why of why you're doing that, then if something gets off, you don't know how to pivot. So by listening for meaning, you'll be able to come up with alternatives if needed, and you'll be able to shift gears if needed. It will also help you to know what the next steps are. I also see that people have a challenge with multitasking and prioritization. So, if you're coming out of school or you haven't had a job yet, you might think that you're going to get one project and you get to just work on it from start to finish. And that for sure is not what's going to happen. You're going to be on many projects, you're going to be pulled different directions all the time. And so by having a clear, organization system, whether that just be a to-do list, a high-level to-do list, a detailed to-do list, tracking, you need to have some sort of system. And I see that people coming out of school or into the workforce don't have a sense of that often. And so it's something, research it, try it in your own life, have something that you bring to the table so you're not starting from zero. I hate saying this one, but sometimes what a new employee is missing is work ethic. Work until the work is done. And if your job is done, you ask your team member or your boss what to do next, or because you're organized and you have a list, you just know what to do next and you don't need to be told what to do. This goes for anything from design work to washing windows on a photo shoot. work until the work is done. An example of what I mean in working until the work is done is that if you're asked to get pricing on something, sending the email isn't enough. So sending the email to ask for pricing on a fabric isn't the completion of the task. It is receiving the information back, putting it into a format that's usable for your boss or whoever asked for it, and getting the job done. So it's not just the task of sending the email, it's the goal of getting the pricing for the item in a usable format. The next thing is to check your work. Checking your work often means doing the work backwards. So sometimes when I'm putting together, or when I used to put together a purchase proposal or purchase invoice for a client, I would, start with the sofa and end with the pillows. And then when I check my work, I would start at the bottom and work backwards. It might be doing your math formulas backwards. So it's often not just doing the task again, though that is something. It's doing it in a different format so that you're forced to think differently and catch what might be a mistake, because we all make mistakes. Another thing you can do is after you've checked your work, you can ask a peer to check your work. It's also helpful when starting a new job that you point out problems to your peers and your boss, but also present solutions. Of course, I want to know if we're doing something wrong or you notice something that's an error, but rather than just telling me or your peer what the error is, if you could already have done some of the thinking of like, hey, this needs to happen next, or I noticed this, so is it okay if I go ahead and correct it in this way? Or it could be corrected in these two ways. Just that simple task and that simple next step of noting the problem and presenting solutions makes you look so much more competent and really helps out the rest of your team. On that note, if you're talking with your boss or your peer, you can start with what you think the solution is and then present the problem. So rather than saying, I noticed this problem and going into all of the details, and then the solution is to make a couple edits to the drawing, you could just say, I'd like to make a couple edits to the drawing. Here's why. And it'll be just so much faster and easier for your peer or your boss or the client to understand how to say yes and just go to the next step quickly. Another thing I see people struggle with is when to ask for help. I think that when people are new, they don't want to look like they don't know anything or they're incompetent. And the reality is, when you're new, we expect you to ask questions. And so if you're not asking questions, I am nervous and afraid that it means that you don't understand or you're hiding things. So at the beginning, asking questions and offering a solution, if it's a problem, really helps me see that you're trying to learn and really take things in rather than just be a task person. Also, sometimes new employees will do a task start to finish, even though they have questions right up front and at the very beginning. And unfortunately, because they didn't ask those questions up front or along the way, they'll have done the task wrong. And so that's a disservice to your team, your company, and the client. So if you've done a task wrong, I can't bill the client for that, and so that's a waste of time. But if you just would have checked in with me or asked me a question up front or along the way, I could give you a solution, keep you moving, and then we could properly bill the client for what's fair. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And last, don't forget to take a step back and look at the big picture. It's easy to get caught in the minutia, and we want to make sure that we're working toward the greater goal and using common sense along the way. So those are my 10 things that I'm hoping to see in new graduates and new employees. I hope that you spend some time on this so that you get the job that you want and that you do a great job once you get there.